Hi, this is the WTF SDK zone creation tutorial part 2. So in the last tutorial we've gone in and worked on this starter zone here, which we've been using as a testing ground for all the other tutorials, and we've basically created a 3-part parallax scrolling background. And while it's functional, the entire zone actually looks kind of plain right now since we only have 3 repeating images. So what I'm going to do is to add some more decoration background objects to the different layers in order to create distinct landmarks in this particular zone. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to go into my tutorial project folder. Right. And go back to my image folder and take a look at all the stuff that I've imported previously. And so in order to create background objects in the editor, you pretty much just drag the files straight from your file folders and into the editors. Currently it doesn't work because when you first open a zone there's no layer selected, and without a selected layer the editor does not know which layer you want the objects to go to. So in order for this to work, I need to actually go back to the editor and bind this to, say, the midground. So let's start with that. I am going to quickly import a couple of objects, and as you've noticed, the context sensitive panel automatically selects the object's properties when you have it imported. And obviously you can relocate objects by dragging and dropping them. So first thing I want to do is this chapel is too big. I'm going to scale it down slightly and move these 2 objects here and there. And then I want to import this bush, and I want this to be behind everything else. So in order to do that, I'm going to use the arrangement button, and the down button sends it backwards. So I'm just going to keep clicking it until it's in the proper position. So that's that. I'm going to create a second landmark here with a well. So I'm going to start with that. Maybe make it slightly smaller. I'm going to add a couple more objects and have it surround the well. So I guess I'll also send this to the background. I guess I can make this 100% and still have it work. Alright, so that's 2, I guess I'll throw in this too. So now I have 2 distinct landmarks, so to speak. I have a chapel and a well. And in order to actually make them landmarks, well, on the minimap, I can select each of these objects and check the minimap landmark checkmark. What that does is it adds a smaller filtered copy of the object into the minimap. So now they actually showed up as distinct landmarks, so the player would have some idea of where objects are located in the zone. So I'm going to do one more thing before I finish working on this zone and test it out, and that would be to add an entire layer that's made out of background objects. So first of all, I would select the foreground layer and click this create layer button to create another layer. And I'm going to label this front of player. So like everything else, I'm just going to drag and drop objects into this newly created layer. Now as you're working on all these different background objects, you'll probably start to get confused about which object belongs to which layer. One of the ways for you to tell whether an object is actually in a particular layer is to try and click on it. objects that are in a different layer than the one that you're currently selected won't be selectable. Another way to distinguish between the different layers is to hold down the control keys. So if I hold down the control key right now, all the objects that are in the front of player layer gets highlighted. Same thing if I do it to the foreground, midground, and background. So this is a particularly nice way in order to see which object belongs to which layer, especially when you have multiple of these layers without an actual scrolling background. Now the other thing that you might have noticed already is that as I'm scrolling across the zone, these objects are not moving. And that is because when I have this front of player layer created, I didn't actually set the scroll speed and it defaulted 0, which means the object is a permanent part of the foreground, not moving at all. So I'll probably want to adjust that and change it so that it's greater than 1.0 because the player's scroll speed is 1.0 and this is in front of the player. And another thing that you want to watch out for when creating layers, especially layers that are so close to the bottom of the screen, is that there's approximately, I don't know, about 50 to 60 pixels of the screen that is dedicated to the user interface. Now that only applies to the default interface, so if you decide to skin all the UI elements in different ways, that particular size will probably differ, but for the default UI you might want to actually move these things up and probably scale them up a bit so that they'll actually show up. I'll probably want to arrange this so that this goes on top so that you can actually see them somewhat in the game. Let's send this up also. Okay, so everything is pretty much done. Guess one last thing that I want to do is to drag and move these objects a little bit more to the right. So we get this tiered effect of things scrolling past. Alright, maybe a little bit more to the right. And as you can see, because of the rate of the things that are scrolling, objects might appear a little bit, there are some angles where things might not be as desirable as you thought it would be. So it's always good to kind of scroll around, and I might not have mentioned this before, but you can scroll around the area quickly by clicking and dragging on this viewfinder here in the minimap. You can also use the arrow to scroll, as I've mentioned before, and that would allow you to see it at more or less the player's scrolling speed. So I am pretty much done with this zone, so it's time to test. So I'm going to hit Control Save quickly, and I am going to move back to the HTML file. Go in and start running around. So as I mentioned before, there is a little bit of user interface space at the bottom that you need to watch out for, but otherwise everything is working as intended. This front of player layer is indeed covering the player character, and I have this thing and this thing, and if I open up the map, there are the two landmarks. There's the well, and there's the chapel.